This was not on our recording that we did, but when Mathew and I were talking off the camera, off of the recording, I asked him what his goals were in coming to see me as a cardiologist, and he said, I don't want to die in front of my children. And that struck me as a very powerful statement.
Find and learn from people who lived it wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from people who lived it.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, hello, and welcome to a really personal episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. I'm Mathew Blades, and on today's episode, we are going to do something just a little bit different. As you guys well know, especially if you go back to the earlier episodes of Learn from People Who Lived It, and specifically episode 9, where I really chronicle my journey of mental wellness and those, as I refer to them now, that trauma trilogy, those key things in my life that impacted me. One of them, of course, was losing my father. And, you know, if you know the story, great. If you don't know the story, I'll summarize it quickly. But, you know, he had a heart attack in front of me, my brother, my mom, and he died in front of us. And it really just awful, just tragic and awful. And one of the biggest fears that I have in the world is that my boys would have to watch the same thing. And it really is the motivating factor for me to lean into a self-care strategy and take care of myself. And part of that is making sure that you go to the doctor. Part of that is making sure that you check off some boxes. And, you know, when your father has an episode like that, and then my mom's had heart surgery and plenty of aunts and uncles, right? So maybe you're in the lane I'm in, where you've got plenty of people in your family that have some sort of heart issue. I really want you to pay attention to today's episode, sincerely, because you probably wonder the same things that I wonder. It's like, is this going to be my fate? Is this what, you know, is going to happen to me? And then I have some really personal questions for Todd, like knowing what he knows about the heart. Did my dad suffer in those moments? And so we're going to talk just about that, everything else, and I cannot wait for you to enjoy this episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. Now, I do want to be super clear. I am the producer and consultant for the Healthspan MD podcast, which is, of course, the podcast that Todd Hurst, Dr. Todd Hurst, has started. And what we are getting ready to listen to is actually episode number 1 of that podcast, where he interviews me about my situation. So it's a total insight into, you know, my heart health. We're actually going to listen to clips of me in a doctor's visit with him. And my hope is at the end of this thing, you completely understand sudden cardiac death and the fact that it happens 1,000 times a day. And there's so many things that we could do to prevent it. So many thanks to Dr. Todd Hurst. Many thanks to you for being here. Let's jump off into the podcast and join it already in progress as he's getting ready to introduce me.
But I also want to introduce our guest today. I am honored and privileged to have Mr. Mathew Blades with us here today. Welcome, Mathew.
How are you?
Oh, I'm excited that you are here, my friend. So Mathew Blades is a well-known radio personality, a podcaster, and you may say, well, why is he on a podcast about sudden cardiac death? Well, we're going to get into that in great detail. And in fact, Mathew is not just a famous personality, he's also my patient. And he came to me to answer some questions. And well, instead of me explaining it, how about we just listen to the first 30 seconds of our visit?
There he is.
Mr. Blades.
How are you?
Dr. Hurst.
Nice to meet you.
Oh,
nice to see you.
Great to see you as well. This is Brandy, who you've met already. Welcome to Healthspan MD. We're excited you're here. What brings you in to see me?
So I want to just make sure that I'm good. I want to make sure that I'm in good shape. I lost my father at 47 to a heart attack.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And my mom just had massive heart surgery a couple of years ago.
So a common reason that I see people in my practice at Healthspan MD is they are worried about their heart health because of a genetic potential predisposition, some family members that have had heart issues, and Mr. Blades has had that on both sides. But also what we're really going to emphasize is the option to prevent sudden cardiac death. That's what we're really here to do today. So my first introduction to sudden cardiac death happened when I was in medical school. I had a professor, a cardiologist, and he said, sudden cardiac death is a survivable event. And this was a disconnect for me, right? Like, how can death be survivable? But as the event with Damar Hamlin illustrated, sudden cardiac death is survivable, but the reality is surviving sudden cardiac death out of hospital is exceedingly rare. Only about 5% of the time does somebody have an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and they are alive with an intact brain 30 days later. So clearly waiting for an event to occur to put on that AED, that automatic external defibrillator, 95% of the time, that's waiting too long. So if we want to prevent sudden cardiac death, we need to start a lot earlier. And that is going to be our focus today. So we're going to talk about first, what is sudden cardiac death? What are the common causes? How common is sudden cardiac death? And how do we know we are at risk? And then we're going to bring in Mr. Mathew Blades to talk to us about his personal experiences, both as a witness of a sudden cardiac death of a loved one, and then his concerns about that being his future as well. So I'm excited to get into this. I also want to mention at this time something that was really powerful to me. This was not on our recording that we did, but when Mathew and I were talking off the camera, off of the recording, I asked him what his goals were in coming to see me as a cardiologist, and he said, I don't want to die in front of my children. And that struck me as a very powerful statement. What you will learn is that by our evaluation, our discussion, looking at some lab values, looking at some risk factors, I believe that we have markedly reduced that chance and hopefully just taken it off of the table. So we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what is sudden cardiac death. So sudden cardiac death is an unexpected death that occurs as a result of loss of heart function. So, there's some nuances to this, right? Like we can die suddenly from a lot of different causes, from an accident, from, a bullet, a fall, all of those things. And, on the flip side of that, you can say, well, don't all deaths result in cardiac arrest? Like ultimately, that's kind of part of our definition of death. But this is a death that occurs because the heart is stopped, not because the heart stopped because of some other insult. And there are several underlying factors that are important in sudden cardiac death. One of the things that we think about as cardiologists in discussing and thinking about sudden cardiac death is the age of the patient. So unfortunately, sudden cardiac death occurs in young people as well. Sudden infant death syndrome is an example of that, but more prominently are the athletic deaths that that have been very notable. If they occur, they're fortunately very rare, but very striking when they do. These young athletes that are in great shape, seem like the pinnacle of health, and they die suddenly. Examples like Hank Gathers, Reggie Lewis in the day. There's been several others of those. Those episodes of sudden cardiac death are heart related, but they're not from blockages in arteries. They're generally from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's the most common cause. So back to Rielyn's question, is there a genetic component to this? Yes, and particularly in young people, it's predominantly genetic. But once people get older, say over the age of 35, the most common reason for a sudden cardiac death is a blockage in heart arteries or a heart attack or some other underlying heart issues like a weakness of the heart muscle called a cardiomyopathy. So I mentioned earlier that sudden cardiac death is shockingly common, and to me, I still have a hard time understanding this number, but sudden cardiac death occurs in the United States about 1,000 times a day. That still takes me by surprise. As a cardiologist, frankly, I didn't understand this because I never saw this, right? Those are the people that don't get to me. They don't get to the hospital oftentimes. And so I just didn't know the magnitude of this until I read the statistics. But, about 25% of people, the first sign that they have heart disease is they die suddenly. So it's not chest pain. It's not shortness of breath. It is it's just death. And so, understanding the people that are at risk of sudden cardiac death and how to lower that risk is really what I'm about, what my practice is about, and what I want to talk about and do a deep dive in here. So I'd like to get back to my guest, Mathew Blades, and just, Mathew, we met, you came to me with some concerns, even though you are the picture of health. I mean, anybody who looks at you sees this very, slender, fit, young looking, everything about you just radiates health. But you, though, did not feel healthy, or at least you were concerned about your health. Tell me more about what led you to doing what most men won't do, which is go see the doctor and get this evaluated.
Well, like you said earlier, man, I unfortunately witnessed my own father's death. And that has been something that weighs on me heavily. And when I expressed that to you, it was kind of one of the very first times that I've said that out loud, right? Why am I here? I'm here so that my children don't have to watch me die that way. That was, I don't know how to explain it in a way that will be meaningful for folks, but it's probably one of the worst things that you can ever witness in your life. Like, it sucks watching somebody die, whether that's a loved one or not. That's an awful experience. But my deal was, it happened in front of me. I tried to save his life and I couldn't. And now a couple of years ago, my mom had all this major heart surgery. And that was the catalyst for me to say, I need to make sure, I need to do everything in my power to make sure that I don't repeat that thing again. And so, that's really why I came to see you, is because I meant what I said. Like, I do not want my children to have to watch that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that was like. And when you take a step back and realize that happens 1,000 times a day out there, like, this is something that is touching a lot of lives on a regular basis. Let me ask you this. Did you feel like there was an inevitability? Mm-hmm. Can I say that word?
That's a tough one.
Yeah. Did you feel like this was inevitable? Did you feel like this was likely going to be your future?
I think the answer is probably yes. Or I wouldn't have even felt compelled to come in here and see you, right? But what I know stops people in their tracks is they're worried, what if the answer is yes? Right? Yeah. They're worried that what if I walk in and the doctor tells me that that's probably the road I'm going to go down if or unless. So did I feel like it was my inevitable fate? I don't think so, only because I didn't make the same life choices that my dad did. He was an alcoholic. He drank a lot. He smoked. He was in the military, and so I know they had some versions and variations of PT, physical therapy, that they had to do to stay up and, pass fitness tests and everything. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I always think about when I think about the episode was, did he know? Did he know? Was there something he was sitting on? Was he having some feeling in his heart? Was he starting to get dizzy? Was he... some of the things, the same concerns that I brought to you about me, was he feeling some of those things prior to, and due to whatever reason, just never articulated that to a doctor or physician in order to get the help that he needed to get?
I will say I love seeing patients that have family history of heart disease, or another example is they've had some kind of evaluation, like a CT calcium score that is elevated, and they're told you're at higher risk for heart disease, because they come to me with not much hope. Like, they're like, oh, well, I got the bad genes, and this is the same thing's going to happen to me. And I just love the opportunity to tell them, you know what, that's not true. Like, we have so much opportunity here to change that. And I say this a lot in my practice is, I can't change your genes, but they do not need to be your fate either. And I think your evaluation was really eye-opening towards that. Like, we found the issue. And I also want to make the point that another common thing that I've seen is somebody has a family history like yours, where there's multiple family members that have been affected, or it's some kind of striking history and that they're concerned about. And because of that, they make very different lifestyle choices in this. And sometimes that's the answer, right? Like it's dad didn't have a heart attack early because of bad genes. Dad had a heart attack early because he made choices that weren't conducive to keeping your heart healthy. But I will say that there is also those times when somebody comes to me like you. You've made different choices. You've lived the life as healthy as you can do that, and yet you still had some genetic predisposition to making artery disease without you having the being brave enough to come in and say, look, I want to know. I need to look into this. We would have potentially missed that opportunity.
It's scary as hell, and that's the only way that you can put it to people. And I understand why they're so scared. Like I said a few minutes ago, what if he tells you that you're good, that's your fate? Like, what if he tells you you have something that's going to contribute to having a heart attack? Like, that's terrifying. But to me, the feeling that I had was, isn't it better to know? Isn't it better to know? Because as you said, there's so much of this stuff that's preventable. And I'll tell you that when we had our meeting that day and you said a sequence of words to me, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it was something to the effect of, I feel like we're going to remove this from your equation. I felt like a very different man when I walked out of your office. I felt like somebody who could start exercising again more vigorously. I felt like somebody who wanted to kind of get back on, so to speak, the treadmill and like keep trucking, right? Because it was a little bit of a roadblock for me. What if something's wrong? And to hear you say like, hey, I think we're going to remove this stuff from the equation. It was like 1,000 pounds lifted off my shoulders. Yeah,
it's so exciting to me to be able to deliver care for people that are in your situation or, similar to that is to give them hope. And I think that's one of the areas of medicine that we haven't done a great job in general is people come to the doctor with those kind of concerns. Like, hey, my father had a heart attack at a young age and I'm worried about my risk. And oftentimes they get a bunch of testing. They might end up with a heart catheterization, and in the end, they didn't really address the causes, like the root causes of that. That's why I open this practice, is to give people that comprehensive approach to what's going to help them live their longest life. And I don't have a crystal ball in this, right? Like I can't guarantee the future any better than anybody else can, but at one time, I thought about a business model to say, look, if you come to me, and we set up a plan, and you follow that plan, I'll guarantee you're not going to have a heart attack in the future. And an
attorneys got involved.
Exactly. Yeah. But I just know that we can lower that risk. Like, 60% of adults in the United States are going to have a heart attack, stroke, or heart failure in their lifetime. And I know that we have an opportunity to lower that by over 90%, right? Like I've been a cardiologist now for 20 plus years. I have seen this in action when people are able to address those issues. They're able to take the medications that are necessary. They're able to get their cholesterol, their blood pressure, their blood sugars, their body composition where they need it to be. They're active, they eat well, they sleep, they manage their stress. When I get, people check all those boxes, I see them year after year and we talk about their grandkids or where they went on vacation because we don't have anything else to talk about because they're doing great, right? It's the people that we can't do those for whatever reasons. We can't, they can't, whatever that is. Those are the people that are calling me and saying, you know what, I'm having that chest pain again. Or, hey, I was out of town and I started having chest pain and turned out I had a heart attack and I got a couple of new stents. The power of this is just incredible. And I was very excited to see you because we've developed a relationship. I admire you. I love what you're doing in the world. I want to help people like you be around for a very long time so that you can continue to do the work you're doing to find what is really the underlying driver of this. And I say this because it's not the most important factor in everybody, but it was the most important factor for you because you'd done such a good job on all the other things that we were allowed to narrow down on one thing.
Well, to get back to Rielyn, and I would love to ask her a question from a nutrition standpoint. It's like, I think I'm doing all of the right things. I think that I'm doing most of what I need to do to make sure that I don't have a repeat episode. But I would be curious from a nutritionist standpoint, like what are you telling people with regard to food, water, diet, that's helping them live a little bit longer?
You know the saying, you are what you eat. You know, what you're nourishing your body with is ultimately creates outcomes. And I don't think we think so simplistically anymore. The reality is that it's not a passive process to eat healthy. I don't know if it ever was, but in this day and age, it's certainly not. The default is unhealthy. There are certain things that we talk about right off the bat, you know, reading the ingredients label, making sure there's not sugar, simple things like that. And people are amazed at how much of this ultra-processed food, or dare I say carcinogenic food, has kind of creeped its way into their daily lives. And it's not about the, you know, occasional going out to have a burger and fries, like, you know, on a Saturday, or, you know, having pizza with your family. It's more of like the little things day to day that stack up over time. And just kind of refining those out and learning what to look for is really powerful. I'll
tell you that one of the reasons that I got excited about coming to see you specifically was because of this holistic approach that you offer your patients, right? I wanted to make sure that I was checking all my boxes. And that was a huge driver for me. And I wonder, if I might, do you feel like you're sort of running an uphill battle with some people because of the food choices they make?
Oh, you know, I think it's a huge lever for a number of people. So, you know, just a little bit of background. So our entire practice and my practice, how I take care of patients, is centered around the 10 factors that are most impactful on our health that we have control over. So I can't change your genetics or the fact that somebody smoked 20 years ago, whatever. Like, those are not changeable. But what we focus on are, you know, first our four things that are our goals, like our objectives: our blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, and body composition. You get those right, those are the people that live a long time. They have less heart disease, low risk of cancer and dementia and stroke. But then it's the 6 tools that move those 4 objectives, and it's nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress, avoiding toxins, and then connection, social connection, but also connection to purpose, connection to contribution. And it's really unique and individual to each person. Like, for some people, it's so common that they'll come in and say, well, my biggest issue is nutrition. And after I look through their things, I'm like, you know, I think your biggest issue is sleep. Like, we got to get your sleep first. But, you know, it's also maybe a moot point because they all work synergistically together. You know, like, when, you know, an easy example of this is somebody who's not active. They're not doing anything physical activity wise. They start doing a little bit of activity, and then that helps them with their stress. So then they're not emotionally eating as much, and then they're sleeping better, and then they feel better, so they want to work out a little bit more. Like, it all works synergistically together. And our process here is not a one size fits all, but really what's going to work best to help you achieve your health goal. And, you know, another thing that I want to emphasize is that it's your goals that we're working towards, not our goals. You know, so I have been through this in medicine. I grew up with this kind of paternalistic or maternalistic view of, I'm going to tell them what to do and they better do it, you know, thing. And then when they don't do it, blame them, right? Like, well, I told them that they needed to start exercising, quit smoking, and eat better and lose some weight, or they were going to die, and then they didn't do it. It's their fault. Well, the reality is that's not how people change, right? And there's a great quote, I think it's Dean Ornish has said this, is people don't resist change, they resist being changed. When I started working with people collaboratively, I and my team, like Rielyn, when we started working with people collaboratively, helping them build systems, that's when the magic happened. And it starts to sound like an infomercial. I know when you say, okay, 90% less heart disease. I mean, come on. That's what the science tells us, right? And those same things that prevent the 90% of heart disease also prevent about 50% of cancers, 50% of strokes, about 40% of dementia. So, that's my passion. My purpose is letting people know, hey, you have a lot more control over your health than you may realize. And, I'm not here to tell people what to do. I just want to give people hope that are looking for that, because there is a lot of hope in this.
Well, the thing that I'm the most passionate about now is people's mental health and mental well-being. And part of the strategies that you've offered me assist in those areas, just getting moving again. Like Rielyn said, eating the right foods. These are things that help people feel better too. And I just know in my heart that when you feel better about yourself, things just work. And I know there's probably no scientific evidence that we have for that, but I mean, give your opinion on that, right? If I'm feeling pretty good about myself and my world that I live in, I'm probably healthier.
Oh, I think it's absolute. Like, managing or measuring stress and anxiety and depression, those are more challenging topics, right? Like, we have scales that we can, get some assessment of that. But any physician who sees patients knows how impactful those are on our health. Like, they go together hand in glove, really. And any treatment program that focuses on just mental health or just physical health, I think is missing the boat.
Completely.
So, as things have evolved now, the biggest problem in healthcare, I would name, is insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome. Nobody knows what that means either, but that's when, prediabetes, diabetes, high insulin levels, that's what's driving the majority of the obesity, the hypertension, the unhealthy cholesterol levels in America. But that also falls into the gray zones between specialists. Endocrinologists are so busy taking care of people with diabetes, they don't have time to see the people with prediabetes or insulin resistance. And there's nobody for these people to see. And, I often tell doctors that, when they ask, well, what are you doing uniquely? What's your practice as Healthspan MD? And I tell them I'm a specialist in cardiometabolic disease. Cardiometabolic disease means nobody knows what that means, but everybody's got it. It's high blood pressure, it's unhealthy cholesterol, it's obesity, it's prediabetes, high blood sugar levels. Though that's the biggest problem in healthcare.
Yeah, and I wonder if the other problem too isn't insurance and how many loopholes people have to go through to get seen and to get testing. And we talk a lot about it on my podcast, this idea of momentum. And so we could take this example right here, this podcast that we're recording right here. Somebody might hear this and they might develop a ton of momentum. They're like, yes, okay, after listening to these guys, like, I'm going to get checked out. I'm going to make an appointment. And then they get on the phone tomorrow and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to have to call so-and-so. And then it's like, okay. And then, oh, hey, I'm sorry, you're going to have to actually run that through your insurance. And actually, we're going to have to let you go see your primary care doctor first. And then we'll get your referral. And so it becomes like, they're sprinting uphill just to get to the person they need to see. And I know in my heart that momentum is one of the biggest things that we have to capitalize on for people who are ready to make the change. But the system isn't set up to get somebody in the next day. And that's probably okay. I mean, you guys have been doing this a long time. I trust that you know what you're doing. But wouldn't you agree that's such a difficult thing because so many people find momentum and then they lose it by the time the appointment shows up?
I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to what Rielyn said earlier, is that the default option is not going to be your healthy option when it comes to food. The default option around health is also probably not going to be in your best interest in health. And, it's a reason why I opened this practice. I wouldn't have opened this practice if we couldn't take insurance. If we weren't able to take Medicare, if we weren't able to take most insurance programs, because Rielyn and I have been working on this for years, right? And I've been working on this for over a decade. Rielyn and I for the last 3 years, and we're trying to figure out how can we help people. And we realized we had a system that was remarkably effective at guiding people to developing the habits that were going to be best for their health, but we couldn't figure out how to pay for it. And the wealthy people were willing to pay for that, but I didn't dedicate my life to this to, just help the already blessed and affluent. Like, I wanted to help everybody. Sure. But I knew I had to figure this out and get it paid for by insurance. When we understood that there are now, remote care billing codes that we can use to deliver our system, then we knew we had an incredible opportunity to change lives.
One of the things I'm thinking about is we talk about, Rielyn, is this idea behind foods that we can eat. And I wonder if you would be able to explain to me so that I can understand it. I hear a lot of things about like Mediterranean diets and heart healthy diets. And I'm just curious, Rielyn, what you see as being one of the more beneficial or a couple of the more beneficial diets out there that people should be looking into and then ultimately talking to their cardiologist about.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's a lot of heart healthy diets like the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. Really what it comes down to and what those ways of eating encompass is maximizing a variety of whole foods. So like fruits and vegetables and healthy proteins and some seafood here and there. That's really where that all comes in. You just want to maximize those, not only the right amount of protein and healthy fats, but also the micronutrients that come in with eating the rainbow, like the vegetables and the fruits. There's so many different vitamins and minerals that, interestingly, they contribute to the color of the food. They're what makes the foods colorful and tasty, but they're also what contributes to our normal body functions, things we need to do to keep our blood pressure normal, to keep our cholesterol regulated, like to keep our weight down, and blood sugar as well. Like the 4 things, those are all so necessary. And so really just finding a diet that, number one, that you enjoy and that you can sustain, but also, one that is going to maximize those, the variety of whole foods and vegetables, and then minimize things that are more processed. So more removed from the source is usually what I say. The closer to the source, the better. The farther away, it's probably not going to contribute to good metabolic health.
We have such a stigma surrounding it from my vantage point, right? Like as she was talking to me, I'm replaying sitcoms and movies where the husband finds out that he's got some sort of a health condition and the wife is immediately cooking him fruits and vegetables and putting it on his plate, right? And we all laugh because he goes from eating his cheeseburger and fries to having veggie sticks and celery and stuff, and he looks so sad. But those types of things contribute to the stigma that that's what it has to be. But food is delicious. There are different ways to prepare food. And from my vantage point, the thing that we have to kind of key in on is how to get people to care about it. Because you won't change any behavior until you really see or care about it.
100%. And it really is our opportunity is we get our patients care about that, right? Because usually they've had a health scare of some sort, or they have some concern that they want to solve. And we give them a comprehensive approach to that includes nutrition. And, I say to everybody, there is no one best diet for everyone. But there is a best diet for you, and we can help you find that. We have a framework that we use, that we guide people on making choices that are going to be right for them. And it is absolutely not about deprivation. It's, one of our real principles in this is if you're feeling deprived, that's not going to last. And so we need to find that diet, that nutrition system that helps you get to your health goals, but it also needs to help you enjoy life as well. Because as you say, food is amazing. Like, I love food. That's one of my favorite things is to, eating delicious foods, but I make my choices based on what's going to be best for my health as well.
Let me get back to this question that she opened up with. And just selfishly, from my own knowledge, it's like nature versus nurture. Is it in my genetics?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably about 25% of our health outcomes is genetic. So there's no denying that there is a strong influence from our genes. But, there's also this phenomenon called epigenetics, meaning that how those genes are turned on or not can also be influenced by our choices as well. And so, what we're focused on are the things that you can have a choice in to achieve your health goals. And for you, Mathew, we found out some things about you that changed the way you approached your health, right?
For example, I don't mind that you're transparent with it.
Yeah. So we checked we looked at the 10 things, right? So we knew your nutrition was good. You were physically active. You were, sleep and stress were things that were good, although you were working on them. We knew you weren't smoking, drinking alcohol to excess. We knew you were super connected. Blood sugar was good. Your weight is, ideal. Blood pressure was really good, but your cholesterol numbers weren't as good as we would like for them to be. So we did a little bit deeper dive into that, right? You did some imaging studies, included a CT calcium score that showed that you had some calcification in your heart arteries. That indicated to me, okay, despite your really aggressive approach to a healthy lifestyle, you've made some artery disease at a young age. So that indicated to me you do have some genetic predisposition. And then we did a deeper dive. Like, what could that be? I went to the usual suspects, and that that revealed an answer to us.
Yeah. And I just wonder for how many, I'll tell you, if you're listening to me talk right now, I went to the doc and I didn't get the best news, but I actually got really good news. I found out that, it is in your genes. And so it's something you're going to have to play with. But I also got some tools to manage it and make it so it wouldn't become my fate. And that's the goal. As I've said a number of times in here, that's my goal, is I want you to go to the doctor and I want you to get checked out, because I don't want the first time you find out about this to be the time when your family has to then plan for your funeral.
Yep, exactly. And that's just the blessing in this, is that in your case, we did not find out, me sitting in an emergency room with you saying, you're having a heart attack, we need to go to the cath lab, or even something worse. We got to find out with some early warning signs that here's where you're headed. Here's some opportunities to change that trajectory. And that was, I'm confident in that. And when we combine that approach with your already, super interested focus on living a healthy life, I'm very optimistic about your future.
Can I ask you some questions that are kind of vulnerable for me?
Sure.
I'm going to get emotional. When you experience this sudden cardiac event, I'm just going to ask the question. Did my dad suffer?
Yeah.
While he was dying, was he in a lot of pain?
Yeah. It's variable for different people. For some, a heart attack can actually be no symptoms at all. It's about maybe 25% of the time. What I know from my experience of people surviving that is that the thing they talk about afterwards is this impending sense of doom. That's the thing. So it's not the pain, it's not the shortness of breath, it's that impending sense of doom. And that's one of the first things that I learned as a doctor, is that if a patient tells you, I have this impending sense of doom, that you take that seriously. That's not something to be, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. It's like, okay, something's going on here.
What about in the moment while the heart attack is happening?
Yeah, I think that's the sensation that I've heard the most, being the most prominent in people that have survived this. If I can share a story with you, though, this is one of the most powerful stories that I experienced as a physician, and something that really opened my eyes up, not just as a physician, but as a human being as well. So it was a Saturday. I was rounding in the hospital at Mayo Clinic, and a nurse that I trust implicitly said, "Can you come down and monitor this stress test?" And I was up rounding on patients, and usually the fellows go down and do that. And I said, "Oh, I'll send a fellow." She goes, "No, I want you here." So very unusual, but I trust her. And I went down, I started talking to this gentleman. He's 75 years of age, retired Marine colonel. Like, there's no nonsense to this gentleman, but he's telling me his story of why he was in the hospital. And it's a classic heart-related story. So I said, okay, cancel the stress test. We're going to do a heart catheterization on this gentleman on Monday. And but they ended up not canceling the stress test. They went through with it, and it was normal. And all his blood tests were normal. His EKG was all normal. He would have been discharged from the hospital that Sunday if I wouldn't have talked to him. So he ends up getting his heart catheterization on Monday. Actually, the interventional cardiologists were giving me a hard time. They're like, why are we doing this? His stress test was normal. His EKG is normal. And I'm like, you know what? His story's too good. Like, we need to know this. And they did his heart catheterization, and he had a 99% blockage of his left main. That's like the main artery to your heart. He was hanging on by a thread. In fact, he started having chest pain right during the procedure, and they ended up doing an emergency bypass surgery on him. So an incredible save, and it felt really good. But here's the part that was really powerful to me. When I went up to talk to him on Sunday about his heart catheterization, I said, we're going to do this heart catheterization tomorrow. And he said, I've had one of those before. And I'm like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, back in the 70s, and I died during it. And I'm like, what do you mean you died on it? And he's like, well, my heart stopped, and I was... but they revived me. And I'm like, oh, don't worry. We're so much better at it now than we were. And he's like, oh, I'm not worried. He says, that was actually the most beautiful experience of my life. I went to this place that was incredibly bright and peaceful and had this overwhelming sense of love. He says, don't get me wrong. I've enjoyed my last 50 years with my wife and my children and all those things. I'm not afraid of dying, though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I always say to people, I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of how it's going to feel. And that's kind of the reason that I want to ask you that question was because, I have, since this happened back in 1996, I've cycled that event a million times in my life. And one of the questions that I always come back to was he in a lot of pain? Did it hurt? You know what I mean? Was it hard, or does the body just have this mechanism where it just shuts off and you don't feel anything and you just kind of go to la la land, whatever you want to call it.
And people are often unconscious during this, and so I think the accurate presumption is that they're not suffering from that pain. But it's also interesting how people, when if they are revived from that, what their memories of that are. But again, it's I've never heard anybody in retrospect say, "Oh, that pain was unbearable," or "that was so uncomfortable." It's more, I don't know. They're introspective about it. Like, it's of course an incredibly impactful event, and I think it's a life-changing event for them as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the ultimate message here is that this is not something to wait on. If you have a family history, if you have concerns about your heart health, see an expert at preventing heart disease to see what the opportunities are, because I guarantee there are almost certainly opportunities to minimize that risk.
Well, I hope you pick something up there. And most importantly, if you want to take a deeper dive into the kind of things that he's talking about on his new podcast, the Healthspan Podcast, we put a link to it in our show notes today. You can link to him directly if you just want to go there right here, right now. Go to healthspanmd.com. Many thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on Learn from People Who Lived It. Don't forget to share this with a friend. And that's all. That's all I got. Okay, bye-bye now.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.